I was supposed to have yesterday off, but there was still an investigation happening at my hospital, so I still had to be there for that, and I was about to take, clock out and take my time off, and then I got called back in. And so that happened, and it was a little bit scary, because they're like federal agents and stuff. And there was like FBI, and there was also there's another couple of federal agencies that were like questioning everybody there. But yeah, a lot of people are getting into trouble, here in California. So yeah, it's been pretty crazy. That one, that's a story for another time. So I'm really late on this, but I have plenty of time to do it, I think. Now, let me fix myself. Aw, I like my avatar. She's so cute. Okay, well, maybe. You know what? I think, yeah, this is good now. Okay, so, this is what I was supposed to do a while ago. And, yeah, it was requested, I think, like, a month or two ago. But I've been really busy, so, so, I'm getting to it now, okay? I'm getting to it now. And it's from our favorite historian, slash mech guy, Tex Talks BattleTech from the Black Pants Legion. Okay, I think I got that one right. I'm pretty sure I'm going to like it. So, BattleTech MechWarrior lore, the Amaris Civil War Collapse of Star League Part 2. I think this is the one where, the bad guy, Amaris, that evil monster, who tricked poor Richard. I think this is the one where now he and Kerensky, I'm pretty sure it's Kerensky, are at war. I think. And this is part 2, where, everything starts, so, okay, let's begin, shall we?
Attention, Freebird Scout. I am the Khan of Smoke Junction. You will surrender immediately, or be destroyed.
Okay, class. Sit down and shut up. We're going to get through this lesson before we evacuate. You did pay me, after all, and this professor needs those student vouchers for booze money.
This sounds actually a little bit like, it does sound a little bit like the, so I went to undergraduate with Badger, and one of his professors sounds like someone like Tex, and I think he was the one that gave him A's. Because he did good work. The rest of the professors hated Eli. They really hated him. And me, I just kind of just kept to myself, But yeah, that sounds like something one of them would do.
Also, regrettably, it looks like the clanners figured out where I live, and those jokes didn't go over so well. Smoked Jaguar, indeed.
How dare you mock my noble lineage? This is a notice of battle.
Excuse me, fucko. Firstly, interrupting a class is rude. Secondly, this lecture is about Star League, so it's like Baskin-Robbins' 51 flavors of dishonorable. Don't you want these guys to know their history of the noble Star League, of the glories of General Kerensky himself?
I am sorry. Can I sit in? I will still review later.
Yeah, sure, I guess.
Okay. You know what? What's the saying? It's the, boys will be boys? This kind of reminds me of, my younger cousins, because, sometimes they go over to my grandmother's too. And they would fight. Like unrestricted, like, fight. And, like, hit each other with toys and everything. Oh my gosh. And they're all boys. And then I have one, female, I have one niece. She's, like, the only female out of all of them. The rest of them are boys. And, but yeah, they would fight at my grandmother's house, and she'd get so mad, and I'd have to help her. But this reminds me of them, like my little cousins, because they would actually fight and, like, hit each other with toys, and there'd be, bruises and everything, and sometimes bloody noses. And their parents just didn't care. And then they'd be, like, fine with each other afterwards.
Just
This
don't go through
reminds
the
me of-
wall and take a seat in the back.
Ah, noble founder, this is a good lecture.
Tex Talks BattleTech, Episode 8, The Liberation of Terra, and Star League's Final Error, Part 2. Okay. Really cool visuals. Very retro.
In part 1 of this series, we introduced the Brave.
I'm saying retro. I was born in 2001. But I'm saying retro. Am I really so? Am I Gen Z brain rot? Is that just how I am?
The bold, the crazy, and the just plain unfortunate souls who took part in this series of events.
Poor Richard.
In the beginning, we explored the formation of Star League, a grand, unifying government built around a centralized, efficient bureaucracy encompassing the great 5 houses of the Inner Sphere. We highlighted key events contributing to its growth, rise, peak, and then gradual collapse from increasingly difficult political turmoil. In part 1, we studied the formation of the SLDF, the single largest military instrument ever created, and its utilization to brutally bring the periphery in line at gunpoint. Because the Inner Sphere likes a free real estate deal above everything else. We also learned that Stefan Amaris, through his scheming, and scheming alone, managed to destabilize an increasingly shaky government by removing the head of state.
Amaris makes my eye twitch.
Quite literally,
Poor Richard.
in this case. To accomplish this, he gambled everything he had. He'd started a war. He put people into the right place at the right time to take control. Together, we discovered that he was a man driven to avenge personal slights against his family, his nation, and his honor by House Cameron, and by extension, Star League. He'd acted out of lust for power, vengeance, and above all, personal vendetta. He alone, through his actions, toppled the old regime through a masterfully orchestrated coup, his forces being in perfect position to seize the hegemony in a single act of magnificent barbarism and cruelty. And it is of note that he nearly failed because of the bagpipe, whiskey, and madness-fueled royal unit that was the glorious Black Watch. Yeah, the mad stand of the Black Watch is a tale still told with reverence between mech warriors for generations now. And it's very important to understand that in dying the way they did, they sent a message. This
Hell yeah, the Black Watch, and they had to be nuked like a bunch of times in the end. And then someone told me that, like the only piece left was like an arm? and that it was basically like flipping them off or something?
This wasn't going to be as easy as Amaris had thought. In a magnificent moment of glorious defiance, in a blaze of crazy, mad bastardism, Amaris was reminded of how fragile a thing like victory truly is. And this brush with near death would never leave him. Amaris would, in fact, take increasingly paranoid steps to ensure his reign was secure. He was, in my opinion, haunted by what might have been, and what may yet be. The Black Watch and their death were just a moment in history, but for Amaris they were a fearful, constant reminder of how easy it could have gone the other way. But we will get to that soon enough. In the last episode, we also had our introductory study in the profile and career of General Kerensky. We saw how he tried to do his best to keep things as they were, in a delicate political balance and in certainly uncertain times. Kerensky was a powerful general, to be certain, but he was tasked with raising a First Lord and in a very uncertain political arena. Star League was in decline, and this heir presumptively could have reversed the course of history. He did his best as an advisor and protector, but ultimately he fell back on what he knew best, his duty and oaths to Star League above all, and that would ultimately doom his efforts. But we'll get to that. And lastly, in part 1, we set the ground for the throwdown of throwdowns, the Guerra on Terra, a war so big it would shake the foundation of the Inner Sphere and lead to centuries of violence, political turmoil, adventurism, and chaos. As you may recall, we left this lesson on a wonderful cliffhanger. Amaris had contacted Kerensky and offered everything. A place in the new regime, ultimate power as a general, if not warlord, and very potentially a very real place as inheritor of Star League itself. But, tempted with everything, the keys to power and the right to use it as he saw fit, Kerensky remembered above all his duty to his oaths, Star League above all. Kerensky had said no, and it wouldn't be the last time. So here we are at the Amaris Civil War. Warning, if you haven't seen part 1, I'd recommend it. Anyways, introduction over, recap over. Here we go. If the theme to part 1 was the death of Richard Cameron and the after effects of the initial coup, the theme to part 2 is the death of Star League. Buckle up, lads. It's going to be a long one. The Amaris Civil War would rage from 2766 to 2780 in a 14-year campaign that would decide the ultimate fate of Star League. It would cost in the end humanity generations of lives in indiscriminate slaughter. Each and every weapon ever crafted by humanity would be used in the greatest contest of wills, arms, and armies ever seen. This war was the end result of, and made worse by, a seemingly endless arms race that until now lacked an outlet for its destructive energies. This was a war unlike any other in the history of man up to this point, so comparisons are hard to make directly. For the first time, humanity was at war with itself across the entire span of the Inner Sphere. From the Rimworld's republic to the Terran hegemony, this world would touch hundreds of worlds, leaving many blasted, radiated, and broken wastelands in its wake. This was a war that seldom offered any quarter, and civilian populations died in terror as increasingly destructive weapons were utilized by desperate combatants. This was a war where slaughter was the norm, and strategic weapons were just another tool, at least in the eyes of Amaris.
I am sorry, dear Nine, Badger told me that if, any solicitors came into the chat, to tell them to GTFO. So I apologize for that, Mr. Dear Nine. However, that's what the channel owner told me to do, and so that's what I will do. Thank you very much. You have a good day.
The Amaris Civil War started with surgical precision as a calculated coup, and when Amaris turned from coup phase to an actual war footing, both his Rimworld's Republic and the SLDF stood atop tremendous, though wholly different, resources to commit to their campaign. The grand prize in all of this was control of the Terran hegemony, the potential rule of Starleague itself, and by extension the future of the Inner Sphere. For the sake of historical note, I will have to try to explain something here. While Kerensky was busy in the periphery, Amaris had struck and struck well. The head of House Cameron was vaporized, the inheritors of that name dead or gone, and it is keen to note that consolidating an empire isn't merely a change of flags. Further, when he came under attack by mad bastards who loved kilts, bagpipes, and murder, though not necessarily in that order, he had been reminded on the pain of hubris. Again, for the record, I say this event scarred Amaris. For Amaris was reminded that he was mortal, and that it took the use of tactical nukes and many of his best men to stop people so angry they refused to die. It is again my opinion of record that the Black Watch haunted Amaris in ways he'd never considered possible. It's not surprising that he'd be unable to forget the Black Watch. After all, their resistance was quickly becoming a legend. And when a unit's favorite grenade is satchel charges, it seems to leave an impression at the very least. But in the aftermath of nearly dying to the batshit madness of the Black Watch, that brush with the possibility of a gruesome end and failure had, again, in my opinion, a profound effect on Amaris. My evidence is the historical note that he became increasingly paranoid after this event, and began to clamp down on the population to ensure, at any cost, he would be safe. Coup secured, Amaris did not just sit idle, again, as building an empire isn't something you can handle with a pen. No, empires are forged by the sword. To the point, in the first week of January, Amaris imported tens of thousands of hand-picked, utterly loyal men from the Rimworld's Republic that would serve as the foundation for the hegemony security forces. Their aim? To make problems go away. By go away, I mean root out dissidents, naysayers, or anyone with any strong objection to Amaris's rule and make them disappear by any means possible. These agents forming the hegemony security forces would, through their calculated, state-sponsored cruelty, give Amaris the power he'd aspired for. Their excesses in cruel methodology would haunt the worlds they touched for generations. Publicly, Amaris insisted on at least pretending things were normal. Normal for Amaris's taste, anyhow. To gain the barest sliver of legitimacy as a ruling power, he called for immediate votes for a new Director General of the hegemony, and further the appearance of legitimacy by directly appointing a hegemony noble to serve in the interim until a vote could be had. The vote for the new Hegemony Director General was organized swiftly through the widespread placement of the new Hegemony security forces and thorough integration of Rimworld's Republic units throughout the occupied territory prior.
It's a little like, Sounds very much like oh my gosh, communism is part of this, and so is socialism. And Badger talks about it all the time. Oh, what's it called? It's like the umbrella for the two. Leftism. That's okay. That's what this sounds like North Korea and like China, and apparently now like huge parts of Europe and stuff. Like that's what this sounds like. It doesn't sound very good. And also, it's pretty cool to hear that even though like they're like dead, right? The Blackwash scared the literal like teeth out of Amaris. They may not have won the battle, but I think they may have helped to win the war.
To the coup. The vote was held despite widespread destruction, panic, and near-total communications breakdown during the coup, and limited repair afterwards. Further, there was the consideration that hegemony analysts projected at best a 10% turnout for the vote, considering the widespread issues with organizing a vote in a chaotic post-coup state. But that wouldn't do for Amaris. He had a new empire to run after all. Amaris claimed an 85% turnout, with 70% overwhelmingly voting for Amaris. This was a fairly amazing feat considering many of these worlds were cut off from the HPG network and over half the planetary governors were dead or missing. Regardless of the legality, Amaris had his title. Those who did report favorable voting turnout did so under extreme duress. But that hardly mattered, as Amaris was, at least provisionally, now the legal Director General of the Terran hegemony. This was abhorrent and horrific to the ruling classes, but it would set the acceptable precedent for generations afterward in practical regime change throughout the Inner Sphere. Once installed as the new Director General of the Terran hegemony, he promised a grand new era of peace and prosperity, that House Cameron's foolishness and mistakes were now at an end, and that the future would be one of unity under his guiding hand. This was not to be just a new hegemony, but a new Star League, reborn as an empire under the guiding vision and limitless power of a new emperor, bold enough to seize it. The HPG networks not critically damaged were slowly reactivated, with the first circuit of SL Comnet firing up to deliver the announcement of Amaris's new empire. Kerensky was the first to issue a reality check. Kerensky's response was legend. No. The major houses offered something more ambivalent, though. Silence. The great houses did not lend him legitimacy, but they also did not mourn the fall of House Cameron. In a way, their silence answered many questions. First, it demonstrated their feelings about House Cameron. Richard Cameron suddenly disappearing after making some exceptionally poor decisions was seen as a favor, if not boon, to the great houses. There was to be no more meddlesome madness from a fading line of bad rulers. No more directives, laws, or missives from a child playing God. But their silence also spoke volumes of the current assessment of the power balance. They were afraid, after all, and had every right to be. Amaris had done the impossible. He had orchestrated the defeat of the hegemony by stabbing it in the heart. He'd taken the head off the beast, so to speak. He'd overcome defenses designed to be impregnable, and he'd even given the SLDF a black eye. He had done the impossible and done so in such a way as they wondered what else might he have up his sleeve. They considered, was Amaris waiting to topple them as well and challenging them to make the first move? In addition, you have to consider that individually the House militaries were somewhat limited by the preceding decades of Star League buildup. They'd been given every excuse to put trust in the SLDF and had done so as arms buildups were exceptionally, if not prohibitively, expensive. Also, SLDF Charter had regulated the size of their militaries, and as such, they knew if they defied and then openly challenged Amaris, they might find themselves overthrown in the name of whatever the hell Amaris was smoking. But on the other hand, they also knew that if Kerensky returned and managed to restore the status quo, any assistance or compliance given to Amaris would become, perhaps, problematic. As such, the House Lords said nothing and chose no sides, at least officially. However, it is interesting to note that the great houses immediately asked General Kerensky's intentions and for him to report his movements. The House Lords' response is reasonable. They had their own issues on their own home soil. You see, the Starleague bureaucracy wasn't doing so well, and that somewhat made things difficult from an organizational standpoint. SLDF bureaucrats didn't know what to do. Follow instructions issued from the hegemony from a usurper. Follow instructions issued from a general far, far away. Follow instructions of the great house institutions they supported and paralleled. This wasn't just the case of paperwork and who stamps what. This was a financial network and banking system that held the wealth of billions upon billions of taxpayers. This was the civil infrastructure and logistics system of the greatest nation ever formed. Bureaucrats across the inner sphere struggled with what to do. They were, after all, in a crisis of leadership. With communications difficulties, lack of orders, or in some cases countermanding orders, plus the House Lords offering integration opportunities with their existing systems, many bureaucrats just went home, or found new jobs with their house governments, and when their checks started to bounce, they decided to walk away. Some civil servants desperately tried to maintain what services they could, believing in Starleague as it fell, believing it may return someday. Most, however, turned their assets and holdings over to the great houses in their jurisdictional territory, choosing to side with a stable government over one ruled by a potential psychopath. Throughout Starleague, the overnight conquest of the hegemony destabilized the Starleague dollar, causing widespread economic chaos. The outages of the HPG network further caused rampant speculation and market woes. Without regulatory control or banking afforded by the Starleague financial institutions now either being abandoned or co-opted by the great houses, people pulled their money out of once safe Starleague investments. Throughout the inner sphere, investors transferred enormous wealth from what was once saved Starleague monetary investments and bonds into house bills as soon as they were able. Folks saw the writing on the wall and voted with their wallet. To the common citizen, Starleague as an investment, either financially or the future, was doomed. And as General Kerensky carefully deliberated his actions, as he knew full well that rash action in this time would doom the cause of Starleague, Amaris continued to reshape the hegemony into his new empire. For to occupy a nation, as stated before, is one thing, but to reshape it, that takes time. As stated earlier, Amaris had founded the hegemony security forces, and those began rapidly forming huge contingents on every occupied hegemony world, recruiting most heavily from those least loyal to Starleague, least loyal to the Camerons, and most swayed by money or the promise of power. Amaris also formed the Director General's Office of Policy and Doctrine. This was more or less an exported extension of Amaris's practice in his homeland, a political officer's corps to police wrongthink. And boys and girls, Amaris hated wrongthink. Amaris punished wrongthink.
This isn't big and enthralling. Especially just like, I see how bad it is here in California. I mean, it's really bad here. It's very bad. I mean, compared to where Badger is. Because Badger's in, like, Texas. But, like, here? I have given up the idea of even getting a car. And this is, like, so good that it lines up with reality so well. I mean, like, there was the, like, recently there was, like, the guy who's, like, my age, who is, like, exposing, like, the fraud and corruption here, like, locally. And he made, like, videos about it. They made an entire bill, like, the governor and everybody here in California made an entire, like, thing to ban him. And to find a way to, like, you know, like, get rid of him. It's exactly like this. It's just that they haven't, like, you know, they haven't used, like, you know, like the National Guard or, you know, local police or anything like that. They haven't used any, like, you know, they haven't done, like a coup yet. But it's so very much like this here. I mean, like I've said in other videos, like with my coworkers, I can't talk to them about anything except to pretend like I agree. Or to just be like, well, yeah, that's cool. And then, like, pretend like I'm just in my own little world. Because some of them definitely would, like, do something bad to me because I don't think the same as they do. And it's insane. Like, and then listening to this, like, this is really well done.
And wrongthink was defined as anything Amaris didn't like. To eliminate
Just like with the people that run California.
any anti-Amaris sentiment, OPD officers were placed in every government office and building across the hegemony to ensure total compliance with every new governmental policy and memorandum. OPD officers bugged public and private places, eavesdropped on all conversation, monitored all communications traffic, and watched with practiced eyes all actions taken by any citizen of this new empire. And under their gaze, suspicion alone was enough to warrant severe reprisals. The Terran hegemony was now in essence little more than a garrisoned, heavily occupied police state. Internal security policing actions resulted in the formation of enormous gulags, over which 200,000 were sent the first year alone. Few, if any, ever returned. Amaris's goons promised great monetary rewards for reporting traitors, disloyal citizens, outspoken critics, or even the barest suggestion of subversive activity. Soon, friends and family turned on each other out of desperation or fear. The state was all, and Comrade Amaris was the state. By April that year, Amaris had formally begun the recruiting and training of some 30 divisions to replace and reinforce his holdings on the hegemony. They were raised from hegemony worlds, but trained, led, and equipped by Rimworld's Republic forces. Every defensible position on any garrisoned world was turned into a massively reinforced fortress. The streets of the hegemony were now policed by men rewarded for brutality and wiping out even the barest notion of dissent with overwhelming violence. Reports of death squads roaming the street became commonplace. Outspoken individuals, former SLDF officers, their families and friends all disappeared or fled. Those who criticized the regime or its actions were swiftly erased from history. Amaris's regime had no place for fence-sitters. You were either pro-Amaris, or you were fucking dead. Mercenaries loyal to Amaris were used to conduct the least tasteful work, or at least the work that required a certain essence of plausible deniability. For unsavory purposes, Amaris had retained the infamous mercenary unit, the Greenhaven Gestapo. They were at first just a group of highly morally flexible advisors to Stefan Amaris, but He found their contributions in taking the hegemony worth rewarding. Ruthless and efficient, the mercs were exactly what Amaris prized. Later on, their war crimes would be a permanent scar on his regime. As stated, the Greenhaven Gestapo was instrumental in the seizing of main Terran government buildings in displays of savagery and brutality much in line with Amaris's designs. However, once they were turned on the civilian population, things quickly degenerated into looting, pillaging, and murder in the name of state security. As they were mercenaries at heart, the Greenhaven Gestapo decided to make some quick coin and sacked Rome. Why? Well, it was the mercenary tradition long-standing at that time through centuries back to sack Rome, as Rome was historically always a good choice for quick cash and good ransom. Being largely undefended with little in the way of organized resistance, Rome quickly bent to their occupation. And as history will indicate, they ran amok in the Papal States. For example, one of their commanders had a portrait of himself spray-painted over the Sistine Chapel. When 750 Catholic monks had a hunger strike in the square, a member of the Greenhaven Gestapo blocked them in with his rampage and stomped them flat. And then they went further with their fun. They then arrested the Pope after he refused to point out priests who were disloyal to the regime. 3 years later, they'd murder the Pope after he refused to cooperate. Through his mercs, Amaris didn't just target Catholics either. Amaris was, after all, a true atheist and decided the universe was a neater place without the complexities of an organized religion.
It is. It's actually a little scary. How close this is. Then again, I'm sure they based a lot of this off of reality and stuff that's actually happened. Oh, this is so good.
His death squads oppressed all regardless.
Well, okay, and not good as in what's happening is good. I mean, in the historical context, and how this is put together is good. The presentation. They've done a good job with this.
Of their faith, for he had room for only one form of worship, to the person and glory of Stephan Amaris. All others were impediments to his operations. Such impediments were removed with ruthless precision. Soon enough, the everyday citizen of his new empire would find themselves under his whip. Amaris made hugely unrealistic demands from the population at large, but all the more from its workers and factories. Workers were brutally beaten, tortured, and executed for failing to meet insane projected production schedules. Meeting quotas was rewarded with additional quotas. People worked their fingers to the bone to earn the reward of bony fingers. Food and medicine were in short supply. A supply regulated by priority toward people Amaris saw as doing what he wanted. The economy switched to a war footing as Amaris entrenched every world he could, building strategic weapons stockpiles for what he saw as the inevitable showdown. Factories were increasingly turned over to weapons production, ammunitions production. Fuel and tires and uniforms were churned out in massive stockpiles and put away for the coming storm. Consumer goods disappeared from stores nearly entirely, as supplies other than war material began to run low. While worlds were given increasingly ridiculous production quotas and exhaustive production schedules, this was complicated by Amaris continuing to raise armies and garrisons, further depleting the worlds of their effective labor forces. And some complained, stating they couldn't both raise armies and equip them. However, complaints were not acceptable under Amaris's regime. If a world complained or even reported food shortages, food was withheld and the entire world was punished. Troubles mounting, Amaris soon began to see problems everywhere. People refusing to believe in him were punished. Worlds he suspected of treason he punished. Populations that pushed back were punished. The civilian situation increasingly worsened throughout the hegemony as Amaris squeezed the people for all they had. Food and medical supplies were soon in critical shortage, and he withheld them routinely as yet another measure of punishment. People begging to be fed was just another punishable crime in Amaris's new empire. And after seeing the excesses of Amaris's consolidation of power, of the SLDF being deleted from the hegemony with nuclear, biological, and chemical attacks, of the bureaucrats being shot at their desks for refusing to move a stamp, most citizens realized they had to deal with the realities of the present rather than hope for a brighter tomorrow. After all, they'd seen those who resisted in the initial stages of the takeover being turned into radioactive sinkholes. Hope was, essentially, dead. Slowly but surely, the hegemony descended into a siege mentality, building stockpiles and defenses for the coming long war. Through excesses in human suffering, Amaris made significant headway. He reinforced the hegemony in ways the Star League never considered. He knew the shortcomings of Star League's extensively planned defenses, for he'd found weaknesses in and exploited them after all. Through hard work and exceptional human suffering, he turned peaceful yet defensible worlds into hellish death traps. He reinforced every fortification for any conceivable attack, siege, or protracted battle. He ordered his men to drill exhaustively and to constantly train to avoid embarrassment like the 4th Amaris Dragoons fighting mad bastards wearing kilts. He ordered the construction of bunkers, hardened defensive points, and extensive spaceborne defenses as well. Please try to understand that Amaris, while having extensively prepared, knew the full might of the SLDF Navy, which was enormous and quite inclined to fuck things up if given the opportunity. The war in the stars went well for Amaris because his men got lucky, and after several bloody fights seized the space defense network. But he knew the bulk of the Navy would return with Kerensky, and so men were trained extensively on the operation of established space defense systems. These space defense systems would figure heavily into Amaris's plans, as his navy suffered heavily in pushing the SLDF out of the hegemony in the initial stages of the coup. The Star League Navy had accounted for itself well, and there were holdouts still hiding in the hegemony, doing much to harass and spy on Amaris's doings from secret locations. I may, if you all are interested, do a whole talk on the grand old Star League Navy, but I'll spare the details for now, as that would be yet another hour. Let me know.
Oh my gosh, and this is already very long. Speaking of long, I need to check on something. I will return. Continue.
Might be fun anyways. Worlds under Amaris's thumb were patrolled for the first sight of the SLDF. Drone ships constantly hunted the hegemony for even the smallest observation craft, making intelligence gathering for the SLDF a precarious venture, if not a lethal operation. As now established, each house, now concerned with many possible futures and not wanting to back a loser, decided to mostly stay out of it. As such, the war broke down to the principal antagonists. Side A was the forces of Stefan Amaris, leading the occupied Terran hegemony systems, including their now extensively reinforced defenses growing stronger by the day. Further, he was aided by powerful defense industries and the hegemony long established as the primary arms producers of the Inner Sphere. He held these in addition to the Ascendant Rimworld's Republic, which he had secretly prepared its industry, economy, and military specifically for this conflict. I won't be vague here. Let's put this into numbers. Amaris's own forces included at least 100 regiments of battle mechs alone. To keep in mind, a single regiment of battle mechs is 150 to 180 fucking mechs plus support divisions. Amaris also had the entire naval and aerospace assets of a great house many times over, through his house's careful preparation for the coup, minus the early lumps handed to him by the SLDF Navy. He maintained a strong grip on the Rimworld's Republic, in addition to all the hidden SLDF weapon stockpiles in the occupied hegemony. Historical notes show us that for decades, the SLDF had warned that the Rimworld's Republic was building an army many times over what they were allowed by Star League treaty. Warnings that were now far too late. For the record here, there is some dispute over the total naval assets of Amaris, but it is said that he possessed over 270 warships prior to the coup, many of which were as good if not better than the SLDF fleet. House armies had 50 to 70 warships at most, and many of those were not line ships. Most House navies had a small core flotilla of capital vessels, and then the remainder was split between patrol and support vessels for anti-piracy duties. And as established, the Rimworld's Republic had patiently built a war machine for generations just for this single moment. Every industry and government plan had been laid down on the principled need to feed a war-fighting capacity, to challenge the SLDF openly if need be. Hell, Amaris had even built enormous battleships, which were better protected than SLDF's biggest warships. They called them the Amaris class, by the way, because Amaris is, well, don't make me get the bib picture out again. The guy had issues that were only solved by, well, enormous battleships named after himself, because that's the kind of guy he was, and... Okay, we'll do this again. Look, he's wearing a bib. This guy has some problems, and who the fuck is holding his arm? Is that like the general manager for the Golden Corral of Space Kansas? It's not inspiring. If you take someone's head off and brilliantly overcome the greatest defenses yet designed, wear something nice like a smoking jacket. Editor, can we do that? And a top hat. Class him up a bit. I know people are gonna go nuts over someone so Machiavellian looking, just like a goof, but just class him up a bit, like 2 notches. Good. Better. Anyways, while Amaris had lost significant numbers of his
I mean, that is true. Some of the worst people that I remember from history class, they did dress well. That was a different time, though, I think. Well, okay, there's some people that still do that. Like Democrats.
Navy to the initial space battles in the hegemony. He was now building new hulls on Star League yards and blueprints. Further, he was rapidly training his men thoroughly on the operation of the now captured SDS networks. Soon all that power would be firmly in his hands. Needless to say, Amaris was sitting on an enormous stockpile of world's weapons and personnel to throw into the fray. He was growing stronger by the day. He awaited Kerensky's next action, trying to bait him into attacking the hegemony directly after being bogged down. So let's look at the opposite side of this equation. Side B of this conflict was the SLDF, a huge multinational force which had now been bogged down in years of counterinsurgency fighting in the periphery. Worn down by years of hard campaigning spread across the entire periphery, bloodied and bitter at putting down a needless insurrection, and now devastated at the loss of their friends and comrades in the hegemony. The SLDF was certainly on the back foot from the beginning, not to mention now being completely cut off from any reinforcement or supply. Losses in the periphery uprising and rebellion, plus hegemony losses in the coup, put total SLDF manpower by 1,255 regiments. I'll say that again as a chill runs down your veteran friend's spine. 1,255 regiments. Gone. 30% of the SLDF's effective military strength from pre-war levels was now totally gone. History has shown us that armies rarely bounce back from losses such as these, if at all. The survivors were now hollow men and women haunted by a horrific, senseless war in the periphery, and now many of them were without a home, or a government, or a cause. The hegemony was occupied, and the status of the First Lord at this point was an unknown. Some would point out that the SLDF had the numerical advantage here, including far superior numbers and naval assets. It is worth noting that the SLDF was split into regional commands. In addition, Kerensky was unable to draw upon the additional resources from the great houses he expected, or even in the occupied hegemony. An army this large would soon need massive resupply before any campaign of conquest, and they had no infrastructure other than what they could seize and capture. There was no infrastructure to replace their extensive losses, no recruitment centers, no resupply and logistics train available. The great houses were not going to help them. They were on their own. Having an army all the larger than your opponent does no good when supplies run low or out. The SLDF was cut off and in a desperate state the day House Cameron fell. They had lost over 30% of their strength mauled into combat ineffectiveness in the Periphery War. They had lost 1 million men before the coup had even started. Further, with the collapse of the Star League bureaucracy came the near total loss of operational budgets and supply. The SLDF at the start of 2767 had at best 10% of its former budget trickling in from tax collectors and administrators still loyal or alive. There would be no paychecks from here forward, and procurement divisions had no means to buy anything at any price. Things were grim. The SLDF teetered on the brink. Kerensky's forces had fought a needless war. They had learned that their home was gone and their leader replaced by a madman. They had no money, no country, and seemingly no future. Supplies were exhausted, ships needed refit and overhaul, and spares disappeared. Morale was accordingly near zero. They needed a fucking miracle.
Oh my gosh. I'm not very sure, I'm not really certain what Badger would say, except maybe he'd say something like, okay, now figure it out. I mean, he was like if you think of like, you know, a soldier in like a movie, that's kind of like what he was. Just like, okay, well, we're gonna die, so let's do what we can and figure it out. That's what I'm not sure what his take would be on this, honestly. But to me, it doesn't sound very good. I'm not sure. I mean, do they even win? Or does everything just fall apart and then it's like a last stand or something? My gosh. This is cinema.
What the Star League Defense Force had, though, was General Alexander Sergeyevich Kerensky, and angry Russians tend to make it into the history books.
Okay, he said his full name and declared him a war hero already, so it sounds like they might win. I mean, that's what it seems like.
Kerensky had purpose and determination. Instead of weighing his options endlessly or sending his troops home, instead of obeying his government, instead of giving up and running away or trying to bargain and buy favor, Kerensky had told the usurper no. Just flatly, no. Amaris had mocked him in reply. Amaris had mocked him and challenged Kerensky to try to attack him. And it would have been suicidal, as the extensive space defense systems in the hegemony were designed to stop massed fleets and invasion forces. And as said, Amaris had paid the price in conquering them, and yet every moment that Amaris had in the hegemony he would be digging in and preparing to defend what he had claimed. It was an unenviable scenario to contemplate. Kerensky at this point had two choices: to drive into the hegemony immediately, to attack the Rimworld's Republic forces now deeply entrenched and in possession of the space defense systems and all the massive weapons stockpiles the hegemony had, or Kerensky could go kick the shit out of Amaris' homeland, the Rimworld's Republic. Kerensky decided that if Amaris would occupy his home, then Kerensky could burn Amaris's down. Well, more or less.
Ah. Oh my gosh. I didn't think of that. Then again, I'm not an angry Russian, so maybe it makes sense.
There were strategic considerations for this. Kerensky rarely acted out of emotion, so this wasn't just done out of pure spite or want to exact revenge. This wasn't ego-driven, but a more calculated response. Kerensky refused to fall for Amaris's trap and instead opted to hit Amaris's home to cut Amaris off from his beloved Rimworld's Republic, its resources, and any hope of significant reinforcement. As well, if the gamble proves successful, this would utterly trap Amaris's forces in the hegemony, buying Kerensky time to maneuver, politic, and perhaps involve the rest of the inner sphere. Additionally, the income of the Rimworld's Republic was exceptional, and by removing Amaris's purse strings even partially, he would make the inevitable throwdown in the hegemony far easier. Kerensky made his preparations. He told his men what they must do. He visited ships throughout the fleet and mustered his forces from jump points around the periphery. He made certain to immediately change the ciphers and communications keys for his entire fleet, as by now he was certain SLDF communications were totally compromised through Amaris's capture and control of the hegemony. Orders were often hand-carried and eyes only. This would be an ambitious undertaking, and there was no room for error. Kerensky told his men and women that they would be launching on a grand campaign to restore Starleague and stop Amaris. He gave appropriate speeches for morale's sake, reinforcing the purpose of his mission. This wasn't about revenge. This was about Starleague. For as long as they lived, the dream was alive. They were soldiers and sailors and had work to do. Through this, he reminded the fleet of its duty. They had a mission. He also made moves to mitigate the supply shortfalls as best possible. His war plan hinged on the ability to forage what they needed from the Rimworld's Republic. To feed a conquest in essence through conquest, he ordered parts of his own forces, his own ships, his own mechs, his own tanks and stockpiles to be cannibalized for the war effort. He radically increased his operational equipment stockpile by eliminating the most damaged ships, mechs, and tanks and stripped those of parts to keep the rest going. SLDF stockpiles were raided. Kerensky ordered sold what he didn't immediately need to war profiteers in the growing black market to keep the SLDF going. He merged ruined regiments into new combined regimental combat teams. He consolidated his forces and told them that they would conquer the Rimworld's Republic and take it from Amaris before liberating the hegemony and restoring rightful order. Kerensky was not keen to make rapid strikes without proper intelligence. Cautiously, Kerensky assessed his situation, seeing what he was up against in the Rimworld's Republic. Through his intelligence services, Kerensky suspected and then became aware of clandestine dealings in the inner sphere. Kurita had been a staunch supporter of Amaris and his dealings. Kerensky suspected that post-coup that arrangement was still in place. Meanwhile, House Merrick had extensively interfered with SLDF deployments during the Periphery War and now, afterwards, were apathetic to the cause of the SLDF, to say the least. The source of that contention was personal animosity. Kerensky once had a young Kenyan Merrick on his general's staff and checked his ambitions, and Merrick never forgot. These complications meant
Of course, someone's mad that, their kid didn't just get, shoehorned into a little spot for themselves, of course. Sounds like certain positions here on the administrative staff here at my hospital.
that Kerensky could only possibly count on the other houses as, at best, potential allies.
Oh, and just like Badger, I hate Nepo babies. I hate them absolutely so.
Even then, their responses were not enthusiastic. But he knew they would at least not be maneuvering against him, and the Periphery had an altogether more interesting response. The Periphery really didn't care the Cameron line had ended with a bang. Even if the whereabouts and status of Richard Cameron were currently unknown to the galaxy at large, the populations of the Periphery did, however, care deeply when the SLDF showed up to fight a brutal war on their home turf. The SLDF had emboldened the Periphery's long-standing anti-authoritarian, anti-inner streak by showing up to be exactly what they feared most, conquering assholes. But when Amaris took over, the Periphery soon saw their savior really didn't care a single fuck about them all that much. Amaris had issued orders for Kerensky to conquer the Periphery, to keep pressure on them, to crush them once and for all, and then to join Amaris's new empire. Upon realizing they were sold out, the Periphery was upset. For the Periphery had once at least somewhat trusted Amaris. After all, he was one of them. The Rimworld's Republic was the greatest Periphery nation, after all. He was the nice fat guy who'd given them shitloads of money and weapons and pointed them at the SLDF, and now they realized they'd been played. The Periphery was now content to let Amaris deal with his own problems and let the SLDF leave uncontested. They had lost enough of their own and gained perhaps, at least notionally, their independence. They were content to let things be. After this point, the Periphery would offer no substantial opposition for Kerensky's new goal, to wrecking ball the Rimworld's Republic. In fact, many Periphery states met with the general and provided him full transcripts, intelligence, and information on Amaris's duplicity and dealings. This information would make Kerensky's conquests all the smoother. Kerensky jumped on the Rimworld's Republic with a slightly rejuvenated SLDF, and in time his conquest became a campaign of legend. While Amaris had taken the bulk of his military to occupy the hegemony, the Rimworld's Republic was not a complete pushover as far as the Periphery states went. After all, this was the place that Amaris had forged into a conquering nation-state. It was a nation built by a paranoid, psychotic asshole. House Amaris had primed this nation for war at every level through generations of careful work to further their strategic aims. It maintained a reasonable standing army by Periphery standards. It possessed a ruthlessly efficient internal security force, a tremendous strategic reserve, a well-educated population, and a massive defense industry. Taking the Rimworld's Republic was the smartest choice Kerensky could make. Taking it would cut Amaris off from extensively developed defense industry and ample recruiting grounds, not to mention a key source of income. On May 29, Kerensky issued the go order from his flagship McKenna's Pride. The fleet assembled at jump points, messages being hand-carried with new ciphers to ensure security. Across the Periphery, forces abandoned their conquest to rejoin the main fleet, often carrying with them the contents of SLDF bases they'd stripped for necessary supplies. Troops falling back set nasty reminders that Starlink property was not to be trifled with. Concordat troops found that out the hard way, when upon entering a Starlink base it collapsed on their head after a mountain of charges went off. Similarly, across the Periphery, Starlink bases were abandoned, trapped, and stripped of any and all resources Kerensky would need for his operation. This was an all-or-nothing gambit. Amaris had slowly bled the Rimworld Republic forces of their strength to set up his coup and occupation of the hegemony. It would still be a monumental endeavor. The Republic was enormous and well-provisioned, and while the Rimworld's Republic had dug in, they didn't have the numbers the SLDF massed fleet had. Every delay in attack would buy time for Amaris to fortify the Rimworld Republic and hegemony both. Any other commander would have opted for speed alone in a campaign of nuclear hellfire and motherfucking revenge. Any other commander would have let his men and women loose in the name of vengeance, to let slip the dogs of war and count the dead afterward, but
Which, I mean, it does sound like it would make sense. I mean, he does have to move fast, doesn't he? I mean, well, of course, a lot of people would die, but, I mean, But he has to move fast. Gosh, that's a tough one. I know for sure that I wouldn't know what to do, and of course, I would never have to be in that position.
Kerensky was not a monster. He refused to authorize a total war approach and saved weapons of mass destruction for hardened military targets. But it would still be a war. There would be casualties. Kerensky took a careful approach, trying at
Yeah, that's what I thought.
his hardest to not indiscriminately slaughter his enemies for the sake of a decisive, rapid campaign. He didn't see the Rimworld's Republic as an enemy, merely, in this case, an adversary. He saw his job as to restore the peace from an unlawful usurper, not to punish a population or conquer purely to feed.
Hey, Mr. Wolf, how are you? It's been a while. And I'm doing okay. So I'm not sure if Badger told everybody, but my hospital is one of those that's been under investigation. Justly so, because of certain things. And so I've had to talk to the FBI. Some Border Patrol was some of them too. ICE, and then a bunch of them. And there's other people that were investigating too. But I'm good. I'm okay. Even though some of my coworkers tried to we'll just say some of my coworkers tried to drag me down with them, and I wasn't having it. And thankfully the agents, like the FBI and all of them, knew that. And so, I'm good. I'm okay. But some of my coworkers and some of the staff are not. But yeah, that's how that's going at the moment. Ooh, I have to, unpause. There we go. Okay, so, there's maintenance going on, in my building. And there's also maintenance going on right outside. So, and it's, attached to my, part of the building. So, they gotta come and go. Anyway, it's good to see you, Mr. Wolf. Damn, coworkers played stupid games, win stupid prizes, glad to know you're good. Yeah, well, they're Democrats. Pretty much everybody I work with are Democrats, except for, the traveling nurses. Some of them are cool. And then, basically everybody else is just, there's, two people I work with that, they're good people. They just, they keep their heads down, which makes sense, the IT guy and, our radiologist. But yeah, good to see you, Mr. Wolf. Hi, and let's continue.
His army. Further, Kerensky knew he had to crush the Rimworld's Republic to strand Amaris in the hegemony, to cut Amaris off from the resources of the Rimworld's Republic and prevent a difficult two-front war. Amaris flipped out at the impending invasion and almost immediately called on his hidden army in the form of formerly loyal periphery allies to assist. Most chose now to do what Kerensky had done to Amaris. Say no. Amaris had betrayed them after all. A bare few moved to reinforce Amaris's holdings, but for the most part the stage was set for what unfolded. Kerensky split his forces to conquer effectively, with commands each having objectives, timetables, and resources appropriate to their abilities and talents. Further, he split some of his forces to go conduct reconnaissance in the hegemony, just to poke at Amaris and make him wonder if it were all a diversion. Kerensky put half his army under the command of his trusted adjutant, General Aaron D. Chevalier. Their forces ran with 3 armies each and 4 in reserve. The plan was to rapidly punch through the hegemony and roll them up before any counterattack was possible, leaving the capital for last. Kerensky sent a message to Amaris' stooge running the Rimworld's Republic as Amaris was busy playing police state in the hegemony. Kerensky offered surrender and no ill treatment if the Rimworld's Republic would merely stand down. Amaris' stooge said no, and then Kerensky attacked. In theory, what Kerensky intended was considered to be near impossible, if not exceptionally difficult, and doubly so with an army that effectively had no reserve or logistical support other than what they carried, scrounged, or stole. If they took any significant losses, there was no real chance to replace anything. Their numbers of mechs, tanks, rifles, bullets, and band-aids were finite. At first, Kerensky was cautious, both to spare his own men material losses and the civilian population the cruelty of war. But when the hidden army failed to respond to Amaris and the Rimworld Republic failed to counterattack, it was on like Donkey Kong, and the outcome was pretty fucking incredible. Kerensky conquered all 248 worlds in 3 short years. To say this was a blitzkrieg is a massive understatement. That's almost 7 worlds a month. 7 defended, garrison, militarized populations a month. One by one, the worlds fell like clockwork in a master plan. The SLDF was Kerensky's tempered vengeance visited upon Amaris' legacy while again carefully sparing damage to civilian infrastructure. What's worse, unwilling to budge his own forces to assist, Amaris could only sit and watch from occupied Terra as his home went dark one system at a time.
Oh, wow. I don't know. I really don't know anything about military stuff. And much less about this, but like... Well, I'm thinking of like planet Earth. And he was conquering like 7 of them a month? That's insane. At least for me. This sounds insane to me. That's incredible.
The Rimworld Republic forces had the benefit of preparation and an extensive home field advantage. Further, they were bolstered by paramilitaries and extensive security forces. However, they didn't have the numbers of the SLDF. Kerensky embraced his tactical advantage and just steamrolled them into the earth while they died defending pointlessly. As the war rolled on, many Rimworld's units threw down their arms, risking the wrath of political officers none too pleased. The reason for abandoning the cause was simple. They saw themselves as citizens of the Rimworld's Republic first and supporters of Amaris as a distant second.
Commander Wolf, yes, and fortified planets to planets with lots of guns. Yeah, I'm just like imagining, cause like... I mean, like, that just tried to explain to me, like, military stuff, right? And so, like, cause he's like, he's from the army. But like, explaining to me, like, different nations' militaries and, like, different wars he's been in and, different missions and, like, all that stuff. And just him saying all that alone, and this is not the scale of a whole planet. But for him to say that alone, it's like I'm imagining like at least one America per planet, right? Or something equivalent. And that's just insane. That is just... It sounds insane to me. I mean, even with all of like, it being like, future stuff and like, all that, it's like at least an America per planet, probably. Plus everybody else has their things too. And it's like 7 of them a month. That's like one planet, like what? Every like 5 days? Or something like that? That is insane.
Amaris had failed them, and they weren't willing to die for a bib-wearing overlord. No, they were more inclined to follow Kerensky. And some did. Kerensky allowed them to serve, and some would, with distinction, try to right the wrongs of their former overlord. That's not to say there weren't some holdouts. Some die-hard Rimworld's Republic soldiers would just feign surrender to detonate suicide vests, echoing the sentiments of the periphery just a few short years earlier. As the Rimworld's Republic government fell, armed militants and militias rose to fight their former overlords, the SLDF, or each other. Mass stockpiles of weapons found their way to the hands of increasingly angry populations intent on shooting anyone not aligned with their ideology. There was something else to consider as well. Authoritarians have a bad habit of leaving people in charge that they can trust rather than someone with a spine. Naturally, the administrator left in charge of the Rimworld's Republic, while loyal to Amaris and a capable bureaucrat, was, at most, a spineless yes-man. Kerensky conquered his way to the heart of the Rimworld's Republic in an impossibly short time span considering the above complications. I'm sparing you the details of a 3-year campaign at this juncture, so that I may perhaps revisit it in detail later for future broadcast. At the end of this campaign, all that was left was Apollo, the capital of the Rimworld's Republic. Kerensky had approached Apollo carefully, saving it for last. He'd thoroughly isolated it before this point, blocking HPG traffic that the SLDF decided the Rimworld's Republic didn't need to hear. Fleets patrolled the system to ensure no use of pirate points for messages or reinforcements, and jump points were now long secured by the SLDF. Kerensky wanted the leaders of the Rimworld's Republic to sit in communications blackout, wondering what the hell was going on, stewing in their own fear. In fact, Apollo had been cut off through careful maneuvering by Kerensky for well over a year by the time he struck. Kerensky took to the field, making planetfall himself to find loyalist Amaris forces engaged in a brutal suppression campaign against their own people. Further, newly constructed fortresses provided some resistance, though they were dangerously undermanned. Internal security had obviously been an issue for some time. Before long, the SLDF had things in hand, with defectors and surrendering Rimworld's forces deeply straining the SLDF's capacity to hold prisoners of war. By the time the SLDF dropped in on the grand capital of the Rimworld's Republic, the SLDF were seen as heroes and liberators by a war-weary population. The average Rimworld citizen had long been under the thumb of a ruthless tyrant from a family of tyrants, and for the first time in their lives had a chance to live the promise of a freer life. When the SLDF rolled into Amaris' capital, they found the streets full of jubilant celebration upon their arrival, and Amaris' chancellor hanging from a lamppost. The government of the Rim...
Honestly, for what sounds like a war against, communism, leftism, socialism, all of those things, for a war that sounds like that's what it's against, that sounds like a great time. I mean, despite all of everything else, but it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense, because Badger will tell me stories of, him being overseas and, them going to villages or, cities and stuff, because he's been all over the world. He's fought on something 80% of planet Earth. It's amazing. And he would tell me there'd be places where they'd go and they would, get rid of the bad guys, and the local, people would be, super happy they were there. But yeah, that's what this sounds like.
The World's Republic was utterly crippled. Its soldiers dead, surrendered, or defecting. Its bureaucracy in pieces and its government stockpiles either seized by the SLDF or looted by growing warlords. Kerensky was not interested in garrisoning these worlds with any force. He aimed to rapidly move on as Intersphere houses rapidly mobilized their own forces to absorb portions of the once mighty Rimworld's Republic for, provisionally, their own good. After all, it's free real estate. Through Great House annexation, many worlds of the Rimworld's Republic would, in time, become the periphery-facing territories of the Lydran Commonwealth and other nation-states. Some would splinter off to become pirate kingdoms, fiefdoms, and micronations. In time, others would disappear completely, content to be ignored by the galaxy at large. Kerensky did not have time to think about the fate of the Rimworld's Republic. Again, he took time to consider the path forward. The Rimworld's campaign had taken a toll on his forces.
Gotta check on something. And I'm back. Great, Kerensky learned from fighting that Turian concordate, while their whole planets are America incarnate, the in their controlled systems. Oh, what do you find? Oh, I don't know. But something, I guess.
But by now, the SLDF was well practiced in moonlight acquisition. Every world they conquered, they stole supplies of armaments, tech, and parts from the RimWorld's Republic military and defensive industries storehouses. Every time a ship became stranded, damaged beyond repair, or decrewed, they stripped it for parts and moved on. Every time a regiment was appreciably reduced in manpower, Kerensky would fold in another and then keep fighting. The once fairly green pre-periphery insurrection SLDF was now a veteran of many hard campaigns, each and every unit filled now with hardened, battle-scarred veterans. While equipment would be maintained, the SLDF was...
Whenever I hear someone say, like, veteran or battle-hardened veteran or something like that, I think of, like, an army of badgers. I mean, I've seen, like, how he and I got involved, of course, was I've seen, like, up close, like, what just he alone can do. And he may, like, he does this all the time, but he may, really talk very lowly about himself, and, he doesn't really... I'm not sure if it's like low self-esteem, or if it's like his nature, or if he's just like so beaten down. But he doesn't really speak very much of himself. And I've seen what he can do to somebody if he wants to. And there was 4 of them. Like, I'm sure he said this, but one of the times that he had to go to court was over him, like, having to save me. And, like, seeing what he can do, like, just by himself. And so when I'm thinking of an army of badgers, that's what I'm thinking of when I hear someone say, like a veteran, or like a combat veteran, or a battle-hardened veteran. That's what I'm thinking of. That's what I have in my head. Some might call it trauma. I mean, there's certain parts of it that are, but the rest of it is like, oh my god, he's amazing.
slowly losing its strength all the same. Kerensky knew that they needed time to rest, for training camps to be set up, and for new blood to fill its depleted ranks. Kerensky, being not a moron, decided to wait a few years to rebuild and thoroughly explore how to utterly destroy Stefan without eradicating the cradle of humanity in the process. Amaris had spent his time digging in. The RimWorld's Republic army is slowly making the hegemony a death trap. Each and every world prepared for invasion that was not only possible, but now inevitable. Cut off from his beloved Republic and watching Kerensky smash it from afar had made Amaris a wee bit bitter. This steeled his resolve to resist at all costs, for there was no going home now. There was also the consideration of watching your own home slowly burn and what that does to a man. In the case of Stefan Amaris, it drove him slightly crazy. Well, crazier. For years now, the heart of Star League had been under the thumb of Stefan Amaris. His atrocities would become a bleak mark in the history books of mankind. Weekly, and sometimes daily, Amaris would broadcast his message to loyal subjects of his empire, while controlling the spread of information he did not approve of. Rumors of brutality, murder, and chaos had escaped Amaris's empire, at extreme cost in some cases, but there was little in the way of hard data or information. SLDF fleets and observers had tried to gather extensive information, but it came at a cost. The SDS and drone fleets were a lethal countermeasure to SLDF curiosity. Amaris in his own dispatches painted himself as the liberator of the hegemony, the conqueror of a corrupt noble house, the man who slew the tyrants of the Cameron line and was now a guiding hand toward a prosperous future. Some chose to believe these lies. Others found themselves incapable of such self-deception. Kerensky took another tactic. Firstly, while gathering intelligence for the push to the hegemony, Kerensky began a PR war. Publicly, he thanked the great houses for not aiding Amaris in his criminal actions. He spread the rumors he knew, painting Amaris to be an incompetent, tyrannical, and ruthless dictator interested principally in punishing those who did not fall in line. Kerensky aired Amaris's dirty laundry, showing the inner sphere who he truly was. Simultaneously behind the scenes, Kerensky met with the leaders of the great houses. His message was simple. Get off the fucking fence and choose a goddamn side because I'm about to drop a hammer on this asshole. Or something like that. Their response was mixed. The lords made a laundry list of excuses for their failures to support the general up to this point, to include inevitably the threat of Amaris conquering them if they played sides. One by one, however, they agreed to give the general some support, some in the form of supplies, some in the form of intelligence, some in the use of bases from which to stage for invasion. Needless to say, it was significantly less than full support for Kerensky's cause, but it was at least not support going to Amaris. Surprisingly, help came from a different avenue. After the general went public, addressing the need to put down the tyrant Amaris, Kerensky found a wave of volunteers. Soldiers, sailors, marines, aerospace jockeys, and Solaris fighters, all from house militaries, began to arrive, often with stolen equipment. Totally AWOL, these units pledged to follow the general in order to set things right. Many of these men and women felt their own houses had been incredibly dishonorable in not helping the general and so set things right by their own hands. Kerensky didn't turn them away and organized them into volunteer corps. By the time the invasion begun, he had 36 fucking regiments of them.
Oh, wow. Well, that's really cool. I mean, that must say a lot about, like, not only about, like, people in general, because there's always going to be, like, people who are kind of like that, but, like, you know, him as a leader, really. I mean, it sounds like something amazing, like, for any person to do. And I'm thinking of this from my perspective, right? Because I'm very limited on this. I think Badger would have more experience in something like large scale than I would. Because I don't know anything more than, like, school and, like, my hospital. But here at the hospital, like, the people in charge? Well, okay, not all of them. Some of them are probably going to prison. That's going on right now. But the people in charge, like, the people that, like, you know, are the head of the hospital, like, the staff and everything. I would not do anything like this for them. Not any of them. Thank you, Mr. Wolf. I appreciate it. Hey, like I said, just thinking of it from, like, you know, my small scale here. Like, if Badger told me tomorrow, like, hey, the world's going to hell, you need to drop everything and meet me somewhere. And we're going to, like, try and, you know, live and, like, survive and, you know, and also, like, help other people, of course. I would drop everything in a heartbeat and go to him. No question. But all the people I work with, like like, you know, like the head of staff and everything, our lead administrator, the people that are owners of the hospital. I wouldn't do it for any of those people, period. I'd run. So, like, just from my experience, it sounds like, Kerensky is made to be like a really incredible person. Like, this is amazingly well done. This is really good.
Operation Chieftain, the invasion of the Terran hegemony, was launched July the 14th, 2772. The painstaking retaking of the Terran hegemony systems from Amaris would ultimately cost millions of lives and several years. The Rimworld's military, realizing their own homes had been destroyed and occupied, realizing that their homeworlds were now fighting each other for territory burning or unlivable, made every effort to fight to the bloody end. There was no retreat for them, for Amaris's plans had never included fight an angry Russian tooth and nail for the future of the Inner Sphere. For those foolish enough to surrender, Amaris's political troops would kill them first. This was a grand defense in depth conducted across the hegemony, with the aim being to draw the SLDF into a war of attrition and slowly grind them to dirt. Kerensky's plan was expensive in manpower and equipment. The terrifying space defense systems had to be overcome, and even with extensive intelligence gathering from hidden fleets, clandestine operations, and even reports flying in from the hegemony from various insurrection groups, it was to be a bloody affair. Kerensky's SLDF had been honed into a remarkably efficient fighting machine, now no longer a mere defense force, but an avenging army of an ideology. Star League and all that it represented. So long as the fleet moved and the army fought, for their fellow brother and sister, Star League was alive. Kerensky's battle plan was to cut off world after world. From the outside in, slowly Kerensky encircled the hegemony, and he struck with purpose and precision. From July 2770 to January 2777, Kerensky took world after world away from Amaris. Amaris's forces had nowhere to run, and they fought like cornered beasts. They burned fields, cities, and worlds. They used every weapon they had. Atomics, biological weapons, suicide attacks. They tried to grind the SLDF down. They used the human population as shields. They forced Kerensky to pay for progress in bodies, and take his time in doing so.
It's just one of the things that makes me, really sad for our military. Because, Badgers described this in real life. Because, most of the people he fought were just really evil people. They weren't how did he made a distinction with, another war, with, World War II. Because, he describes, having to basically, fight through families to get to the, real bad guy, and the families are being forced to fight him, or the bad guy will kill them. And then, he told me a story of, a pregnant woman being held by a guy, and then him having to, make the choice of trying to get to him through her. And just, my gosh, I couldn't imagine what he's been through. They have done this so well. This story is so good. The story's amazing. And, the way it's, written is exactly, how, Badger has told me about his experiences in war. Using civilians as shields, right? Firing missiles and, bombing them with, kids with, bombs on them and stuff. My gosh. It sounds so painful, to have to go through that. This is brilliant. This is just amazing. No, I like the stuff that's like depicted in it isn't, of course, but like just the story is amazing.
Kerensky's strategy was to cut the invasion corridors into slices and put 2 armies into each. Raiding units under Aaron de Chevalier had learned much, namely that the SDS systems
Mr. Wolf, true, it is. Amaris is nuts. Yeah, it's. My gosh, I really hate the man.
in place were not to be trifled
He's not even real, and I hate him.
with, and that the worlds were reinforced all to hell. The plan then became to cut the hegemony apart from the outside in, to maintain constant pressure so that reinforcements could not be shuffled from one point to the next, and thereby denying Amaris the benefits of a defense in depth. It was important to not stop the pace of the invasion once it started, otherwise Amaris could shuffle and dig in. What they found when the invasion started horrified the SLDF. It would take the deployment of the SLDF's full 1,000 infantry regiments to conquer many built-up worlds as Amaris had built terrifying defenses. Some worlds were no more than awful killing fields, with Kerensky unwilling to authorize weapons of mass destruction for a decisive or quick victory. When the local forces were defeated, infantry divisions earned their keep hunting down hegemony security forces, pro-Amaris paramilitaries, and brainwashed citizenry, afraid Amaris would punish them if they didn't fight the SLDF. The pace of the conflict made Kerensky fully aware that this would not end easily. He sent in forces to set up legitimate judiciaries to judge and punish those who assisted Amaris's regime and its many excesses. He sent in the SLDF Logistics Corps, now well-trained to strip useful materials to replace his stockpiles, and he ordered garrisons left to ensure that the chaos of the Rimworld's Republic collapse would not repeat in the hegemony. Kerensky arrived, conquered, and left functioning governments and infrastructure in his wake. This was not a blitzkrieg to tear down a government. This was a true liberation. Still, the cost would be in human lives. The Star League Defense Forces found the drone ships and space defense systems were manned by elite teams now all too familiar with their operations. Despite thorough strategic considerations, the SLDF found itself utterly incapable of attacking the SDS systems without serious losses. Each and every attack was at enormous cost, losing ships they could no longer replace. Groundside, Amaris's forces would respond to invasion by falling back to extensive fortifications and using every weapon at their disposal, to include nuclear warheads and chemical attacks. Amaris's troops were content to burn a world, its population, and even its future habitability to cinders to deny it to the SLDF.
Mr. Wolf, essentially, this is the Russian White War, but in space, with next, Amaris Communist Russia, Kerensky White Russian Army units loyal to the Tsar. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know much about Russian history. Like, you know, the history, like, I learned was all, like, just... It was, like, the shortened version where they, like, don't tell you much. You know what I mean? Like, you know, like, pretty much all of my education's been in California. And, like, you know, our history class was, like, you know, maybe, like, a few pages per subject. And that was about it. Like, you know, Badger's education when he was living in California, but this is, like, decades ago. I'm almost like 1/4 of his. I'm almost like 1/4 of Badger's age. But with like, you know, he learned a lot more than I did especially in high school. In high school, most of the time it was like, okay, we've done like a report, or like, you know, we've done like, you know, question and answer, right? But yeah, and then like the rest of the time was basically like leftist propaganda time. We spent like maybe like 15 or 20 minutes on like course material, which of course I would find out later it was mostly lies. Right? They did lie to us here. And then the rest of it was just like propaganda from like the teachers. And it was the same thing in college too. I didn't learn too much in college. A lot of like the coursework and stuff I had to have Badger's help with it. Especially when I was an undergrad. But yeah, it's not so much that the education system is bad. It's that the people that run the education system and what they do with it is bad and evil. Right? And it's like nothing but like all my teachers were like multicolored hair and like, they had piercings of some kind and they were all feminists and, they all like, also one of my teachers was like, I forgot what he was, but he was like a binary, non-queer, whatever. And like, he was a furry too, which was funny. Like, he would wear his fursuit in class. It was wild. But yeah, like when I was in high school, like, it was really crazy. We learned almost nothing. And then even in college, like, and during my undergrad, it was like maybe 50% actually like coursework. And just, like, I remember, like, Badger, like, because he and I had a lot of the same classes. And he would have to, like, gnash his teeth and just get through it, because he had to attend the class. And then everybody would, like, dump their need, because he was the only one in the class who, like, knew most of everything. And so everybody came to him for, like, to help with homework. So, yeah, he had a harder time than I did. I mean, I just went with it and was like, whatever. This is how it is. But yeah. Mr. Wolf, high school is supposed to prepare for college, but never does. Well, I'm Gen Z, and like, we've come up under like nothing but creeps, freaks, and weirdos, like Badger says. I'm not even joking. And then like when I got to my job here at the hospital, I had to take like a couple of months just to learn like specific like skills, like key entry. We still use like certain portions of our system or key entry, that's what it's called. And then some of it's like SQL, and that's really hard to learn. And I have to use parts of it as well because our top administrator only does like 10% of their own work. And they expect us to do the rest of it. So it's like, it's really insane. But anyway, enough of me like talking about my school and stuff. But yeah, I don't know much about, Russia at all. Much less about like the US, but I'm starting to learn more stuff about the US. But I have to do it on my own time.
After all, denying a world was not that grand.
But yeah, it sounds like cool history to learn. Maybe I'll find some videos on it later.
And a gesture for someone who'd already lost their home. Each of these battles cost the SLDF personnel and time, in many cases to capture worlds heavily scarred by total war. Despite successes, the war was slowing considerably. By 2774, the operation was grinding to a halt. They'd conquered 100 worlds, but the pace was slowing exponentially. Total casualties were at 10% across the SLDF from the start of this campaign, significantly higher in systems guarded by SDS systems. No matter their strategy, planning, or talent, the pace of invasion was slowing. Often enough, the SLDF encountered horrific conditions among the population which they then had to safeguard and look after, eating into shrinking supplies. Garrisoning these worlds depleted manpower, and taking care of a population was a further complication. But Kerensky saw it as his duty, and did not shrink from it. Further, Amaris's troops had now formed the opinion in mind that the best sort of shield was human, and forced civilian populations into internment camps, booby-trapping them thoroughly so any who ran or were careless died in a messy fashion. This was how Amaris's men often managed to fall back, by throwing civilians and hostages into the mix and leaving the SLDF to solve the moral quandary. The SLDF was almost at breaking point.
Yeah, give me a sec, I gotta check on something. Okay, so, the maintenance man, he had to, get inside of, my apartment. And he had to look at certain things, because all of the units, like, on the same floor are, they're all, kind of connected. So, he has to, come and go and, come in and check things and stuff. So, it's a little busy around here at the moment. Um, Dude, I got a message from work. Yeah, no, it's a little busy. So I have to let him in, and then I do have my own bedroom, right? So what I do is I come inside of here and then I lock the door, just in case, because things are still very crazy around here. I mean, they had a protest a couple weeks ago, and then another protest recently, and then they did another protest recently, and then a bunch of people got shot and stabbed here locally. During another event, and things have just been really insane. And in case anybody, was wondering, yes, I do use VPN, and on top of all of that, but yeah, here in Los Angeles, it's only a few short steps away from what's going on here with Amaris ruling the hegemony and stuff. It's really bad. I mean, I'm doing okay for now. There's a lot of DHS and ICE, and there's some FBI nearby. LAPD is doing, a little bit of things. I mean, they're doing some stuff around the hospital. And then the local sheriff's department, they got a couple of people nearby. So it's not, it's as safe as it can be, I guess, for California. But also it's also not as safe as it could be. Oh, Jesus. It's such a mess at work because, so, okay, at my hospital in Los Angeles, I won't say which one, there's a lot of investigation, a lot of agents. I had to talk to a lot of people, help them with a lot of stuff. And now we are somewhat short-staffed. A few of the doctors are, gone now, so is some of the administrative staff. So are some others. They're all going, away for a very long time, it sounds like. And on top of that, that means there's a bit of an extra workload for the rest of us, because it's hard to find people to come and work here, because it's really bad to work here. It's really good pay, but it's California. So anyway, that being said, let's continue, shall we?
until Amaris made a rather fateful decision. He ordered abandoned what he considered to be indefensible worlds without SDS systems or, to his taste, extensive fortifications. He pulled his forces back and reinforced what he had, concentrating his armies into what were already supremely reinforced defensive positions with years of enhanced fortifications. The SLDF quickly jumped on these undefended worlds, glad to gain ground with no loss of fleet resources. Unfortunately, even with this new gain of ground, it was there that the invasion hit a snag. Losses to ships and personnel were piling up. Surviving in newly functioning Star League bureaucracy was having massive issues upkeeping Kerensky's force.
Mr. Wolf, fair? Damn. Oh, fair. Can't put phone on charger, so we'll be AFK, but we keep listening on earbuds, phone charger low. Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate you anyway. Dang it, Mr. Wolf. You're a good wolf.
Forces. Further, the massively reinforced SDS systems were nearly impenetrable. The war had destroyed cities and populations in the crossfire. Millions of people were starting to call for the general's head for the destruction he had wrought up to this point. Many more millions were dead and cold in the ground. Kerensky decided to halt the campaign while the SLDF rested. There would be no fighting for months as new bases were built. Supplies were stockpiled, forces rested, weapons repaired, and the problem of the SDS systems yet to be overcome. This would be an opportunity for the SLDF to regroup and prepare for the final push to Terra. Worlds began the slow process of healing, doing their best to overcome massive infrastructure damage. Soon, Kerensky had another issue. Fucking Kurita. House Kurita had been a thorn in the side of Kerensky from the start. From opposing fleet movements and supporting Amaris, at least well unofficially. Soon, Kurita made a proper power play. He arrived on hegemony worlds bordering his territory, worlds free of Amaris' forces, with what Kurita called a relief force. The Kuritan Relief Force was a giant fucking army with civil servants, engineers, and bureaucrats. Essentially, Kurita was annexing territory and seeing if the general would stop him. And while Kerensky thought about slapping the shit out of him, he really couldn't fight a two-front war. He publicly rebuked Kurita, pulling his forces back, and realized in the end it didn't matter anymore. He now had the forces not tied down in garrison, and at least the people of that world would have a government and assistance. Even if it was awful, Kurita, Katana wearing asshats talking about honor and stuff. Kerensky couldn't afford to deal with the Kurita bullshit at this time. He was thankful he could bring his forces to fight instead of garrison duties. Realizing that Kerensky wasn't going to drop 50 megatons of Russian whoop-ass on them, the other houses soon followed suit, annexing parts of the hegemony for safekeeping, humanitarian reasons, or whatever bullshit they could offer for the land grab. Only House Davion was upfront with Kerensky, saying that they'd take the worlds off his hands in exchange for full support militarily, logistically, and to some extent financially. When Kerensky stuck that deal with Davion, houses Liao and Steiner followed suit. Kurita didn't, though, because Kurita is an asshole and will always be an asshole. Prove me wrong. With resources now flowing into the SLDF and garrisons now free to assist in the final push toward Terra, events would soon take an interesting turn.
You know, thinking of, the heads of the houses, it sometimes sounds like children. That's not even a joke. They made all of the leaders of these houses seem like absolute children. Like overgrown toddlers who were like spoiled brats.
January of 2775, Kerensky's extensive intelligence services became aware of a disturbing new development. Amaris' forces would exfiltrate a world, stripping it of its resources, and then setting it alight with nukes before leaving. These worlds were abandoned and destroyed to tighten Amaris' defenses further, but also to deny staging points for Kerensky. Being that he was not a monster and genuinely gave a shit, this set Kerensky into action. Amaris in the past had used nukes defensively, like one might use a fly swatter, but it was always against the SLDF, or the SLDF and anything near it. Nukes are nukes after all. However, at this point, Amaris was intent on creating a huge problem for Kerensky at any cost. Kerensky sent 12 Army Corps forward to immediately land on those worlds, and what he found horrified him. Amaris had turned his nukes on civilian populations. As his men evacuated worlds, they bombed cities, fields, and factories so that Kerensky would have to move in, save, and take care of an irradiated, starving population. And as a tactic, it worked. Amaris knew Kerensky's character. Amaris was playing to Kerensky's guilt over causing the casualties he had thus far. Kerensky's savior complex required him to intervene, but Kerensky did so smartly. He involved the great houses for two reasons. One, they wanted the territory and didn't care if the planet was a little roughed up. Two, Kerensky wanted them to see firsthand how fucking crazy Amaris was. They took the territory and the lesson. Amaris would have zero possibility for assistance from outside, other than what he currently held. There was, however, a glimmer of good news in all this mess. When Kerensky liberated Nagasaki, he found a place a very bad way. The world was nearly ruined. SLDF forces saved what and who they could, but they found a certain place had been thoroughly ransacked by Amaris during the occupation. The Nagasaki Computers Collective had been on the forefront of artificial intelligence, and when Amaris took over the SDS and automated drone systems, he ransacked their offices, deported their lead researchers to Terra, and burned everything and everyone he couldn't take. However, in the depths of the facility, Dr. Catherine Glimp had years before hidden a hard drive with all the data on the SDS that Nagasaki Computers Collective had ever researched. These blueprints, schematics, and documents proved it was possible to jam the control system used for combat command and control of the drone units and the links between them. With this information, it would be possible to fight an SDS and win, though at a cost. Within the weeks, though, the SLDF had an edge, and soon, the war was on the road again. The closer to Terra the SLDF advanced, the worse it got. Even with the edges they had, the numbers they had, the training and experience they shared, Amaris had by this time again drawn his forces into tighter and tighter defensive lines. By concentrating his defenses, the Rimworld's Republic forces, plus their new regiments, had made the war more difficult the further Kerensky advanced. By the time the conquest of Terra was on the table, it was 2777, and the SLDF was down to 35% of its pre-war forces. Many veterans of the war had been fighting for so long they'd forgotten how the war started. Many had been injured, rotated out of action, and then rejoined their old unit, now merged into the remnants of 5 others. Some veterans bore scars of 10 or more years of hard fighting. Some veterans had fought for over a decade to find their homeworlds burned and their family long dead. For them, there was nothing but duty, really. They were invested in the outcome of the war just to see it done. Amaris had to be brought to justice. That's all there was to it anymore. Through all this, they'd remembered their oaths. The Star League was alive so long as they fought. The final liberation of Terra started January 23, 2777, and in itself it took over 2 years of brutal fighting. The road to Terra had been punishing in the extreme. The majority of Kerensky's ground forces were dead, destroyed, disbanded, or lost, and half of his navy was littered between the periphery and the cradle of humanity. What ships they had left were held together largely by the salvaged remains of their sister vessels. Few ships, if any, bore no mark of the war in some major way. The crews, however, were hardened fighters willing to see through to the end. The road to Terra was going to cost them more than they thought. By this point, as stated, the other houses of the Inner Sphere saw the writing on the wall and decided to back the general, not the usurper. There were precious resources at last to afford a final operation, one last huzzah. Military supplies and refugee assistance poured in from the Capellan Confederation, the Lyran Commonwealth, and the Federated Sons. Not House Kurita, though. Again, a most shameful display. As a historian, I can think to only say this: Kurita has always been kind of a dick. Just saying. Anyways, with such backing, with financial and material assistance, with fresh blood and parts and equipment, Kerensky proceeded toward the endgame. January 23rd of 2777, Kerensky invaded the most heavily defended world in the known galaxy. Pardon me for phrasing it this way, but you don't just walk into Terra. Terra had been reinforced over the centuries to be impossible to invade. Only Amaris had ever succeeded in conquering it through generations of preparation by his dynastic line. The exploitation of an idiot First Lord, brutal cunning, and sheer audacity. Terra had been turned into a jewel of an interstellar empire by the Golden Age and the wealth of Star League, and then reinforced by a government that saw defense spending as a great way to create jobs and create peace of mind. And these weren't just the greatest space defense systems ever made. No, they were now manned and operated by people who had spent years training for this. They were manned by people who had nothing to lose, and were more than willing to go down in a blaze of glory. Let's touch on these obstacles to assault before you could even land on Terra. First issue was the space defense systems. These were enormous battle stations guarding the jump points. I'll talk about the KF drive and jump ship someday, but let's just say this. Most, if not all, traffic into a star system comes from the jump points located at the zenith and nadir points of the star, where you will find the jump stations. Around these jump stations in the Sol system, the Terran wing of the space defense systems had built enormous battle stations ready to beat the brakes off anyone who jumped through. Anyone who's played EVE Online would probably recognize this as the classic old-school gate camp, salt harvesting included. Further in the system, there were enormous batteries and defense systems located on Luna, in stations around Terra, and on the ground. Further, there was the single most expensive and advanced drone ship system ever built. Okay, what's a drone ship? Alright, imagine a warship weighing many thousands of metric tons. Now imagine it's completely filled with computers designed to detect and murder intruders. Fill it to the brim with weapons and armor. Then, since it's not filled with meat bags, keep in mind it can maneuver and fly like a goddamn missile. Also, since it's not filled with mouth breathers, it can take a tremendous amount of damage and keep fighting. Lastly, these were directed and driven by thinking AI that had no compassion, knew no fear, felt no pain, and were willing to do anything to accomplish its objective: protect Terra. There were 250 of these fucking things waiting in the Terran system. They were on active patrol, they were ready to respond, and instantly set to attack at the first sign of trouble. They were so adept at their job that SLDF scout vessels had to routinely pop in to observe from out in the Oort cloud to avoid being absolutely murdered by the drone systems. And that's not the best part. Amaris had even ordered the enormous sunshade protecting terraform Venus to be moved and used as a giant sun laser. Yes, Amaris had gone bonkers and become Dr. Evil at this point. The fragile sunshade tore when they maneuvered it, and Amaris got really mad. Venus went from a paradise world to inhospitable within a single generation. I mention this in detail not because I trend toward tangent, as you know I do, but I want you to understand, this was Amaris' thinking. Have a huge pile of military assets and go, no, I want a giant space doom laser powered by the sun. Mr. Editor, I want you to add Venus to the list of things Amaris ruined. Thank you.
I honestly really don't know what to say. I mean, he's already ruined so many planets. Honestly, what's one more?
Closer into the system, there were extensive service batteries located on Luna and stations surrounding Terra and, of course, on the planet itself. Batteries designed to eliminate any approaching fleet on their own through massive, accurate fire at standoff range. Now, once Kerensky was past all these space-based problems, if even he could manage that, he would have to invade Terra itself. Each and every major city on the planet was fortified and manned by fanatically loyal divisions willing to die for the self-crowned emperor. They'd seen their homeland disappear and realized there was nothing left to fight for but Emperor Amaris. After all, escape was now impossible. Amaris had long kept his elite, most fanatical, and most talented divisions close to home. He drilled them endlessly for a situation just like this. Kerensky had spent a long time thinking about this day. He'd been left for dead in the periphery and then rose again to conquer it. He'd made peace with the periphery, fought a civil war, conquered the Rimworld's republic, conquered the Terran hegemony, bypassed and overcome 1,000 challenges up to this point. He'd beaten defenses engineered to be near unbreakable time and again. He'd kept the SLDF together, gave them purpose, and led them to victory after victory, but he'd never given in to being a monster. No matter the losses, no matter the blood spilled, he remembered his oath. Through his strength of will and the strength of his forces, he remembered and honored their oath. He wasn't just a general at this point. He was Starleague, and Starleague was in town for the big show. Even after all he'd suffered, he didn't act in anger upon the eve of invasion. He offered Amaris a single chance to lay down his arms and surrender, and for him to be treated humanely with the promise of a fair trial. But for Amaris, losing a home, losing a nation, a war, and a coup makes a man a bit crazy. Amaris had watched it all burn. He'd watched everything he'd ever achieved fall away like ash in the wind. Amaris refused to surrender in an insane, rambling message. Kerensky realized his choice was made, and it was on like Donkey Kong.
Okay, I need to check on something, but my gosh. I had thought that maybe the length was just going to be due to, just slides, essentially. Like how in school, someone will have, a PowerPoint, and then they spend, 20 minutes on a slide that has, 5 things on it, and that's it. Oh, no. Oh, no. This is very different. But with that, I have to go and check on things, because I think the handyman needs to come back in. I'll be back.